Hello there, everybody in UK Crime Bookland. I'm here with James to talk about his latest book, White Throat. If you could give us an introduction to the book, please, James, that'd be great.
Certainly. Thank you. Thanks for interviewing me, Alex.
No problem at all.
White Throat is the third book of my crime series featuring Lowry, Detective Lowry, set in Colchester. You don't need to have read the previous two. They're all broadly different, but it's set in the 80s, and it opens with a duel fought in Colchester High Street, and that's all I say about the book. Otherwise, I give too much away. I mean, it's just all my books start with a grand opening, and then we go on from there. So Colchester, I should say, is a garrison town. It's one of the largest garrison towns in the country, and it always has been since the Romans. And that's part of the premise of the book. It's between military and civilian rivalry. So I thought, what a great start to have two soldiers have a shootout in Colchester High Street, and then the police and the military police battle it out. When researching the series, because the military are involved in all three, did you find anything particularly interesting about how the military investigate crime versus civilians investigate it? Not really. I'm often asked about research. I just knew. I know people that were in the army. I don't try to. I'm just interested in the story rather than the rights and the wrongs. I mean, ever since I wrote the Frost books, I realised that when I spoke to somebody in CID that how they had the hierarchy in the police force was wrong, but nobody seemed to bother. And I pointedly make it different, so it can't be, because it's I use a real setting. I go out of my way to make sure that people aren't identifiable. So I got, for example, the guy who runs the garrison in Colchester has a beard, and you're not allowed to have a beard in the army since Victorians. It's not allowed. I got criticised. The reason I did that was to make it fictional, that there could not be a guy called the Beard that ran the Colchester garrison.
Yeah.
And so, because there would be somebody running the garrison in the 80s, but I have to make it fictional. And so I don't, and that's not answering your question directly, but, I know that the military police have this framework to a degree, but I don't want to go down that line of making it, I don't want to make it too, or be a slave to reality, really, because it's just a story.
Lowry's very different from, say the Frost books that you wrote. What was the unique reason for his character traits that you chose?
Well, I mean, most detectives are flawed. That's a given. I mean, that's what, crime books are more about the characters than the plots, I am led to believe. But Frost had, like so many of the good ones already, like he was sloppy, he was rude, he liked to drink, he's sort of like a lovable rogue, which meant that all those attributes that are dear to myself, I couldn't really use. So Lowry is sort of more introverted. And so a lot of people who've reviewed him say he's not known. And he is sort of like very reserved. I mean, he's got a failed marriage. But I went from the beginning and made that unusual. His thing was that he was married to a nurse, which a lot of services did mix or do mix. So he's just, I suppose he's sort of more of there's less on display with Lowry than there is on Frost. And when I wrote these books, I was more concerned with the place rather than the characters initially, because when I wrote Frost, I had to not only write about Wingfield's character, I had to write about his own town, which was made up.
Yeah. And
so I was more, when I first wrote Blackwater, I was far more interested in setting the scene of a place I knew. And I suppose in those, thus far, the characters took second place. So there's far more probably too much description of Mersey Beach and Colchester High Street that suit everybody. So I mean, Larry's sort of quite a different animal to Frost in lots of ways.
Yeah, and there's quite a lot of description of the sub characters as well, like the supporting characters of Lowry, balancing their stories with Lowry's. What was the intriguing part about doing that, I suppose?
Well, I think you can. Part of the way Larry could be defined is how he reacts around other people. So if you put, whereas the other characters have very obvious emotional reactions, he's more defined by how he reacts around them. So, you know, women in the police force in the 80s was sort of not frowned upon, but it was difficult. So his relationship with female detectives is defined by how he gets on with Gabrielle, who herself finds it difficult. Kenton was sort of quite educated. There was a time where he was possibly too educated for the police. And then you've got Sparks, who's very much old school. So it's sort of like Larry's in the middle, and you've got all these three different people with different backgrounds around him, which sort of help define who he is.
Yeah. What was it about the town of Colchester that made you choose that? I mean, I know you might be living quite local to it, but you don't live in Colchester itself, do you?
No, I don't. But I do live it's down the road. And so what happened is that I'm from South Essex originally. I did move here, but when I was writing the Frost books, the people I knew, a lot of people would tell me stories about Colchester. So they told me stories about the garrison. So this idea of them boxing, they have a boxing team they had a famous boxing team in the 30s. Colchester police would go off to Europe and fight matches with Germany, pre-war Germany. And it was very much about the social interaction. So I knew a friend of mine who was based in Colchester Garrison. And so it seemed quite unique. It's sort of like, it's on the coast. Colchester itself had a lot of separate identity from the rest of Essex. And all these stories sort of built up. And that's why I decided to write about it. And I don't think people have written about it, but not in that sort of way. So, yeah, it's just an interesting place to write about. It's it's the oldest city in the country. It's on the coast, and Essex itself is quite an unusual county. It's got one of the largest coastlines. It's the first book about drug smuggling. It wasn't just Devon and Cornwall, the south coast that went on. A lot of action went on here in previous centuries. I just was interested about the place, really, and it's the nearest big town to me. And I did actually live there for a time, so I was familiar with Colchester High Street.
What about when deciding to set the book in the 80s? Was there a reason for that, or was it just because you'd been comfortable with doing that through the Frost books?
You're right. I was comfortable with the Frost books, and also I didn't want to get bogged down in stuff I didn't know, like DNA and I mean technology. I like my detectives to be scrabbling for a phone box and reaching into his pocket for a mobile phone. And also, it's, I'm of that generation where I grew up in the 80s. I was at school there, so all those. It's sort of a lot of nostalgia. It's a bit of a nostalgia trip because I remember that period particularly well, like the sounds and music from that. So yeah, I suppose I felt comfortable in that era, really.
When thinking about that era, is there any big crimes of the time that you might include in later books, or is that not on your style because you've not done it at the moment? But I'm just thinking.
No, well, there was. I mean, famously, there was the Range Rover murders in the 90s, which was at Rettenton when these drug dealers killed. But I don't really want to go. I don't know. I mean, I'm not. And also, now you mentioned Yellowhammer, the middle book was sort of vaguely influenced by the Bamber murders. Do you know that? I mean, there's a part of Essex known as the Essex Triangle in the 80s where like a lot of there was a lot, but a very small rural area is quiet, in very high incident of crime. And a journalist wrote a book called The Essex Triangle, and it's 3 points in Essex, and all these murders happened. And in Yellowhammer, there's a murder at a farm, or is it a murder, a suicide? And at the back of my mind, that I suppose I was sort of vaguely influenced by Bamber to a degree, because when I moved down here in 1990, that's all people were talking about. So I sort of pick up things without really trying to recreate them, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I just realised what you meant, because the ITV did a dramatisation of it, didn't they? I think.
That's at White House Farm, yeah.
Well, I was just thinking, because you set in the books in the early 80s, and I just thought that, you know, knowing that it's now got 3 books in the series, I just wondered if there was any kind of stuff. How many books are you intending on the series? Or
well, I don't know, to be honest, Alex. I've thought about it a lot. I'm writing a standard one book set in the 90s now, but I left it. I mean, that period in time was like an end of an era. You know, Time Magazine's Person of the Year in 1983 was the computer, and all the books, my books, that and the Frost books, are all about big shifts in culture. And the end of Whitethroat is quite pivotal, because that police station on Queen Street was where they were, and the police have since moved to a new station. It's sort of like I left myself with so many things dangling at the end of Whitethroat. It's so up in the air that where it's going to go is sort of could be anywhere, really.
Because there's a lot of with the number of characters you've got in there, and the options for character development, and I just thought that there could be quite a few books coming up. But
there is. There is. That one took a lot. There's a lot going on in Whitethroat. It's sort of about. It's to do with the area changing as well. It's to do with the closure of the Docklands and the shipping and Felixstowe and Colchester Port. It's that is definitely an era. It was just I set myself quite a high bar to follow that, but given the time taken to get their characters to where they are, I want to take them somewhere. But that'd be telling.
What made you decide to come up with those characters anyway, after you'd done the Frost series? Because you already got those characters in mind for a series for yourself, or did they just pop up afterwards, or has there been
I don't know. I had the name Lowry. It's named after Malcolm Lowry, who wrote Under the Volcano. That's where he's from. I was a big fan of that book when I was younger. Well, I still am a big fan of that. I knew I wanted somebody smart. Like, he always wears a grey suit and a black tie. It's a bit like the guy out of Mad Men, you know, that TV series sort of. He was going to, as I said earlier, he's going to be the opposite of Frost. Whereas I knew I wanted somebody who at least does his tie up in the morning. Because just to point out is that the TV version of Frost is very different to the book version. So David Jason looks quite smart, but the book the character in the books isn't. So I was more familiar with that. I don't know. The characters are quite blank until you put them in a situation and you see how they react. So ideally, they all react differently. I knew there was going to be different ages and different backgrounds. That was my starting point.
As the series is developing, do you think that you'll change telling it from the point of view of one of the other characters, like is them narrating their story? Or
Yeah. I thought about that. I mean, it swings POVs from. There's 4 of them telling it, and sometimes it can. Yeah. I mean, it'd be interesting. That's always a very interesting way of doing it. Like, a new character comes along. So there's a there's a guy from the drug squad called Free that comes in at White Throat. He hasn't got POV. I was thinking about doing him as having a completely fresh look at them, so you get another view of those guys, you know, because you don't see how they are physically, sort of thing.
When you were first gone back to writing after working in publishing, what was the biggest challenge from your day job to write?
Keeping them separate.
Yeah.
Keeping them completely separate is the key, because you keep the publishing over there away, and not get involved, and try not to publish yourself. Reality, tell people what you think, because although you might think you know the answers, is that you're so wrapped up in your own world of your book that actually you don't really know, and you have to keep back. Step back. I just keep. That's why I keep it under a pseudonym, is to keep it separate.
Yeah, I was always quite interested with the pseudonym thing, because you wrote that the first one under the first Frost one under your actual name, and then changed it, didn't you?
No, we didn't. I wrote it with a guy called Henry. Is why I got that name.
Yeah,
but
because you wrote it with two of you, didn't you? I think
that's right. We wrote one book together. That was quite heavy going, but I kept his name, and then just kept, because my surname's quite unusual, so I kept that name. I like it. I mean, sort of quite bland and disinteresting, sort of James Henry. So sounds like a middle-aged crime writer, which is what I am.
When writing a book with someone else, what were the challenges of that? Because I'm doing that at the minute, and I'm always curious what other people's challenges are.
Oh, it's nearly impossible. I hope you have an easier ride than me, because when two people write a book about somebody else's characters, I don't know, it's so far back now, but it was a massive headache, because we saw everything different, and we had different perceptions, different ways the story was going to go. Unless you planned it chapter by chapter, then it's quite hard to do. But I like to write whereby I don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah,
that's right. And, you know, because that's the point, is if you don't know where the story's going, then the reader won't know. So to write those sort of things with two people is extraordinarily hard, because you'll just go off in tangents all the time.
Yeah. How true to the Wingfield series did you feel like staying, or was that one of the problems, because you disagreed on how close to stick to it?
Well, I think what we did is, those books are they're not sort of the stylistic, it's quite dated, and also it's sort of, things have moved on quite substantially. So those books are more a cross between an amalgam of the television and the original series, and they're quite different. You know, I mean, it's quite a unsavory. They're much darker, the books. They're sort of very noirish. So I think ours is probably similar to people's perception on the TV than he is in possibly real life. I mean, those books were incredibly good, those Wingfield books. The way he keeps all those strands in the air. I don't know, some people say they look the same, but so the research stopped. Once you start writing, once you've had all the characters and the broad layout of Denton, you have to come to a point where you can't read those books anymore, and you can't watch the TV, and you just have to go with it. And that's after book one. I did the last three on my own. I didn't really think about it anymore.
Yeah. You know, when you decided to go back to early Frost, and his wife was in there, was that interesting? Because of course, she, in the TV series, in the early books, she wasn't in it, so that must have been a new challenge to.
Yeah, that's one of the hooks, as we say. Yeah, well spotted. That was sort of like, because the point is that the television, the character, there's only 6 books, so there's 90 TV episodes, but those guys were well past the retirement age. So the perception would be to go back in time. I don't know whether we did that well or not. I mean, but that was one of the things to do it when he was still with his wife. And
well, I think you did, because I've read. I think I must have read the majority. I think I've read all of your books and the majority of the original ones as well. So yeah.
oh, great!
Yeah, the style is close enough to Wingfield to be authentic, but it's still yours. So,
Thanks.
yeah. What is, you said you're working on a 90s standalone. Is that more difficult now that you've got to deal with the forensics and the technology that you didn't have to deal with in the 80s books?
Sort of. I think it's just really early 90s before the phones came out. I mean, they're there, but they're not quite there. But the big changing thing is with how the police behave, which is the PACE Act, PACE police, which is in 1984, where you can't just slap people in the you can't withhold. That's the big thing. Is like the protocol and how things. There was a cut-off point in the 80s that people always point to. So there's that about what the police are and aren't allowed to do. The technology is sort of mid-90s, but I'm trying to sort of steer around that and more focus on storytelling than precision, really.
Considering that, as you just said, the books are pre-PACE. Have you had any reviews or conversations with actual police about how it changed when PACE came in?
Yeah, well, yeah, I have, not for a while, but I think it sort of happened differently in different areas. I think if my perception is how these changes filtered through. I mean, if you take example, you mentioned White House Farm, the Bamba thing. Yeah. If you look at that case, that was in the 90s, and it didn't. To me, you can see how badly that case was handled, and it sort of think, well, who's governing what's going on here? I mean, they burnt the evidence, didn't they? So
yeah,
I think it's quite hard to know unless you're there and you can speak with authority. I think it's quite hard to have a firm grip on what actually happens, because what happens in reality is often beyond belief. The sort of thing.
When you're thinking about the stories and stuff, how do you balance the different points of POV?
Well, that's a good question. You sort of know as you're writing it that you need to move it around, and I think it's good to have that because it helps with the pace of the book, so you don't get its long dreary pages. But sort of each scene has to add something to the story. That's the main thing, and if it comes from a different character in a different place, that aids to how it goes along. But you sort of, after doing a few, you're consciously aware that you've done a period in one character. I started doing all that with the Frost books because it moved around 3 or 4 of them all the time. And it also allowed you to be in more places than one, so it makes your story bigger if you've got more characters.
When you were working on the female characters, was there any kind of problems with that? Because of course in the 80s, as you say, women were struggling to be recognized as
individuals. Well, I think it's the same with race and sexism. I mean, it could be. I acknowledge it's there without being heavy-handed, because it's not. You know, you don't want to be reminded of how unpleasant, but you have to recognise it was a thing. But there's a danger that it's stereotyping people. So it's a balance. You could say that you could invent a female character and say, actually, she got along just fine, just to make the story smoother and be modern, but that wouldn't be a representation. So it's quite hard to get the balance right. But I have readers who have female readers read it through just to check, that it sort of rings true to a degree. But it is quite difficult to because everyone has their own perception of these matters, and you don't want to make your police force that unpalatable that nobody wants to read about them.
It is kind of difficult for someone of my generation, because I was born in '86, so I was born after the books are set.
Sure.
So have you spoken to people of my generation about how the books are perceived, or do you not generally?
No, I don't seem to have much. No, I don't know. I think you're in the minority there, because I don't think people that of your generation read much of this sort of thing. I haven't really come across it. I mean, I suppose you could say, if you want an indication of how the times have changed, you could quite easily go and watch reruns of the Sweeney on the television, or those programs that were made then, or do you know what I mean? It's sort of like, that's crystallized. That is how they went on. And there's a thing on the TV recently about police corruption. I mean, it's all there. It's like, if you want comparisons, there's plenty of. It's been documented in that period. But no, I'd love to know what people of your generation that were born subsequently at least make of it. And what do you think?
Well, I think that it's generally accurate as to what I've seen on the fictional side of telly, but obviously with me not being around at that time, it seems difficult to say. But yeah, because I haven't really spoken to many people of your generation about how our books are, the books written now about the 90s and stuff. It just generally hasn't come up. Maybe I should talk about it more. Because as you say, it's the 80s was such a big cultural switch for how the police work.
Yeah.
When you were working in publishing, what were your influences for your writing, and what did you look for when you were looking for a new writer?
Oh, I still do work in publishing, by the way. I am still there.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I mean, well, I mean, you tend to publish what you think people would like to read, really, and I mean, and what you're sent, because people send me books on submission. I don't do crime. That's the only thing I can say, because I don't read it, because I find it. I used to do crime a long time ago, but since I write it, I can't really read it, because you just, without even knowing it, you'll be nicking ideas, and you say that's a really good idea. Even not, I've done events with guys, and I think I read their books beforehand, but I avoid it now, in case I sort of, because at least if you don't read any, and somebody says that's been done before, you say, well, it's not been done by me. I haven't come across that. But so I try to keep my, avoid it, so I'm not influenced in any way.
So as you work in other genres, does that affect you, like your style in your writing, do you think? Or
I couldn't tell you that, because I I can't quite, because my writing is in my head all the time. I've got no perception of what it's like, or I've got no idea. No, I couldn't say. I've got no idea whether, maybe subliminally, but I mean, I publish a lot of non-fiction, a lot of American writers. I don't think they influence it, but I imagine there is what you're doing, what I'm doing day to day. Something is in there, but in a way that I can't quite quantify.
Yeah. Who are your writing influences, would you say?
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I know who I like reading. I mean, I like people like, I would say, I did a thing for the Sunday Times. I think one writer I really admire is like Paul Bowles. He's like he's in Penguin Classics. He's long gone, but he writes. He only wrote a handful of novels. He lived in Tangiers, but his books are sort of like unquantifiable. They're thrillers. It's set in North Africa, and he does is place and character, and it's a bit like Lawrence Osborne. He does those sort of exotic type locations. I wouldn't say they influence me, but I admire that people who write a lot about, who can do great settings, location, because that's what I'm trying to do. I mean, Essex isn't Tangiers by any stretch, but that's the sort of writing I like, because it's very transportative.
If you like transportative, when you're reading for pleasure, do you read to escape or?
Yeah, totally. I read to escape like everybody else.
So, do you read like any like kind of particular fiction to escape, like anything like?
I tend to read classics, because then it's reasonably good if it's been in print for like a couple of 100 years. I like George Eliot, that Middlemarch. I mean, that's the sort of thing I'll read, but I've got to a stage now where, and also I don't like to read stuff stuff that stands the test of time. I'm very keen to read. But yeah, I'm trying to think. I'm not actually reading anything at the moment, so I'm reaching back to see what I last finished. But Penelope Fitzgerald. No, you've got me. I can't think what I'm reading. I'm staring at all my books, all sitting in front of me. But I'm not reading anything current. But
yeah, well, do you not read when you're writing? Because I know a lot of some authors don't, because they don't want to get influenced by anything.
No, I don't exactly. I don't. They're completely different things. You can't. It is a different part of your head. But I've sort of gone through spells of reading a lot and then writing a lot. I can't do them both at the same time.
How did you find it writing in lockdown?
Oh, ground to a halt.
Yeah.
Didn't write. Because I used to write. I normally write on the train when I commute, and I didn't have that discipline, so it's sort of gone to a degree.
If you were writing on commuting with the train, did that make the writing faster? Because of course you're having to move about and wait for trains, or was it? Yeah.
It was. It's more focused, put it that way, because that was before they had Wi-Fi on the train, and if I sat there and there's quite a lot of delays, so I got a good. Just sat there and made me do it, and if I had an idea, I was brilliant. I'd get it done. I wrote all those Frost books, like mostly on the train. I was in Hammersmith then. I even wrote on the Piccadilly line in some instances.
Must have been busy writing on one. I mean, not like struggling to find somewhere to sit to write. I thought on the train.
Oh yeah, I can't do it standing up. I mean, the trains down here, there's plenty of seats, but if this was a long time ago, but I used to have to get across to Hammersmith from Liverpool Street. You could be on that one of those things for quite a while. But that was only it probably only happened once or twice, but I remember thinking about it at the time.
Given that you've been involved in publishing and writing for a long time now, what would you say the upcoming trend is in the genre you're covering?
I think over lockdown, I've been told that crime books have sold well. People like reading crime books because they have a sense of closure at the end as well. And there's lots of them. So I think I've heard that the genre is doing quite well. I mean, I'm not for genres. I don't think you should quantify books in that way, but I think if there's lots of them with characters that crime is always very popular. People like series and like a resolution. I can't quote you any statistics, but I think it's as popular as it has ever been. Would you agree?
Yeah, I would. Yeah, because at the minute I'm getting like between 2 and 3 books a week read, and that's it's basically what I do all day, every day. So if there wasn't enough books out there, I'd be struggling, I think. Yeah. What have you spoken to other authors about the problems you might have had in your writing, or do you just generally keep to yourself?
I keep to myself, really. I mean, they all do. Writers say one thing but probably mean another. I mean, I haven't seen many recently, but everyone's different, aren't they? I mean, I haven't really spoken to anyone about writing much recently.
Yeah. What do you do when you're not writing? Is like to relax?
Windsurf.
Cool. Yeah. Is it good windsurfing where you live then, or?
Yeah, half an hour from the coast, the Blackwater Estuary on the North Sea. That's what I like to do.
Do you do bird watching as well, like Larry, or is that just?
Bird watching is what I do when it's not windy. I mean, that's why that's where the idea came from. So I thought that the bird watching conceit was quite a good one because it's quite sort of in the 80s. It was sort of was as much a thing as it is now. You sort of had Bill Oddie turn up at West Mersey, perhaps, but I wanted to make him go from doing something very physical to something more not sophisticated but observational. And there's lots of ties with bird watching in as birds observation with detective work. And I started bird. I'm not a brilliant bird watcher, but I can, since I'm out here, I can tell them apart. And I just thought that was quite a good idea. So I made him a bird watcher, which of course wouldn't have gone down with his very masculine domain where he operates with Colchester Police. And I like the idea of the titles as well. So, Whitethroat is a songbird and Yellowhammer is bunting on it. You see in the summer. So it just gave just an idea, which I thought hadn't been done. I quite liked it.
When you were coming up with the titles, what made you get? I know they're are generally named after birds, but what made you make the title decisions?
Well, the first one was Blackwater, which is the estuary, but that's I like the colour and the word together. And so I thought I'd come up with similar ones. Now, Yellowhammers I see all the time, and I just had to work that in somehow. I mean, I came up with the title before I had the idea, put it that way.
Yeah.
That was a challenge.
The as you say, Yellowhammer was based on a farm and things.
Yeah.
It's very different to Whitethroat because Whitethroat is based in city. Was there any kind of challenges in writing the rural versus city and town?
That was deliberate. That was intentional, because the first one, Blackwater, was set on the coast. The second one was on the countryside out here, and I definitely wanted to go back to the town for the third one. And that thing about Colchester is that there's no sort of sprawl as yet, and as in places like Chelmsford, it is surrounded by countryside, and that's it's quite an outpost out there. But I mean, I live in the countryside, but I know Colchester. But so those were the clear ideas I had when I did it. I did want to write about the countryside deliberately, and then move to the town.
When there's lots of changes in POV, how do you come up with the minor characters that fit in with them?
Well, yeah, they're quite hard because otherwise you have to give them attributes which makes them very stereotype. You have to say, they're quite hard to do. I'm trying to think of ones. I mean, the criminals are quite,
yeah, the criminals are quite interesting because the way you've constructed it, especially in Whitethroat. I don't want to give anything away, but they are quite rough and ready, aren't they? I suppose.
Yeah, there's quite a few in there. I don't know how I come up with them really. I mean, it is difficult, the minor characters, because they're important, so you've got to put something into them, but you don't have that much space for them.
Yeah, like when you're having your haircut, is it as much gossipy as it is in Whitethroat, or?
Well, yeah, I suppose. Yeah. That's it. Could be.
Yeah, I'm just think of the little places where you pick up things that might appear in the novel. Are there any kind of locations you've been to and thought these kind of people that show up here might make a good novel later?
Yeah. You always like storing stuff as you go along. I mean, you could use that. There's loads of things like that. I mean, I can't tell you what they are, but what people say and do and things that happen. Yeah, I actually put something my barber said to it in a new book, actually. Yeah, you always pick up things as you go along. That's what gives them a reality.
Yeah, it's the little character stories, isn't it? I think.
Yeah.
When I'm thinking about how to construct my own series or books, what advice would you give to any prospective author to construct a series?
I'd say write it down, even if you're unsure. Don't procrastinate. Write it down, even if you're and rather than trying to get it perfect to start with, if you write it down, you can always go back and change it. And what starts as perhaps not a strong idea might take you a place where you don't know where you're going. So the key is to keep writing, I think, and not overthink it.
Yeah.
Try to develop a flow.
Yeah. Now that you move into the 90s one, if that's going to be a standalone or a series, is there any kind of differences in writing a standalone versus a series? I know you're not generally.
Well, standalone and series is sort of like a publishing term. I mean, no standalone need be a standalone unless you kill them all at the end. I mean, there's always an option for more. You say standalone only to say that you're not finishing with the previous series. So I just wanted a bit of space from the characters in White Throat to do something different, and then to give them perspective. And most crime book, I can't write a book a year, and a lot of people like them every year. So
what is the time period you're comfortable with?
I don't about 18 months.
Yeah. Does that allow you just to get in the flow better, or is it just
Yeah. I think it allows for a time of reflection, and you don't, although you should constantly write, but you don't, doesn't mean you should submit it as soon as it's done. You need to sort of go back over it.
Do you do a lot of self-editing, or is it generally a team thing? Because I know a lot of authors have a lot big team behind them, but a lot of authors I also talk to do a lot of self-editing before it gets there.
Yeah, I wouldn't say self-edit the finished thing. I mean, I write stuff down and it doesn't go the way I want it to do, so I take it out. And then, yeah, I am edited. That book can be too long. I'm sort of like get hung up talking too much about one particular thing, and that goes. But I can't decide for myself where that should go. My editor does that for me.
What's the biggest challenge about deciding what to keep in and take out when it's a multiple perspective book?
Whether it really adds anything to the story, or whether you're just putting it in just for padding. I suppose I would put local detail in which I want to put in because I'm writing about the place. But an editor might think that's irrelevant. You've said too much about the hawthorn hedges in Essex for now, that sort of thing.
Yeah. When dealing with Larry as a character, what have you enjoyed most about him as a series?
What have I enjoyed about him? I don't know. I don't know what I enjoyed about him at all. I sort of like the fact that will he ever be happy? I suppose he's not particularly happy. I suppose I'm sort of constantly thinking, will he settle down? Will he adjust to not fighting anymore? I don't know. That's about it, really. Not very. Sorry, that's not a very useful answer, but it's an honest one.
Yeah. Well, honesty is a good one. Yeah. Why were I know you said about boxing earlier, but giving Larry such a physical hobby must have been interesting. Have you, when you were going with your friends, do you watch boxing or?
No, I'm not a fan of boxing at all. I mean, it's only, as I say, it's that I knew that the Colchester Police had a boxing team in the 30s, and even later that it was a thing that they did. That being in the police was a big social undertaking as well. I knew they were very competitive. No, I don't know much about it. I mean, other than that, I've never done it myself.
Well, thank you so much for talking to me today, and it'll be going on as part of a double header at the end of the month. So,
well, it's been a real pleasure. Great start to the week.
No problem at all. Me. And hope to read the books later in the series when they come. Thanks again.